Hello, my name is Sebastian Dubanel, and today I'll be discussing Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is by far one of my favorite movies that's on this list, even for class, and I was really excited to see it. Um, I think maybe just the shock of seeing it the first time was really exciting for me, and it is an epic genre defining film, and I love movies that I don't mind them being really long if they can tell like a really exemplary story. And this is a movie that does that extremely well. From like the plot is fascinating. You know, it's a narrative more or less from Heart of Darkness. It goes into psychology and like the damages of war and just what it is to be like a person, not only within war but just the mental health of someone. And it's a war movie, and based on the Crash Course and other things, it's considered even in the Western at the beginning. I find this movie to be really exciting from its plot. The story behind it is really fascinating. In fact, people argue like that the documentary of when how this film was made might even be better than the actual movie because it's tragically like horrifying to see how hard Francis Ford Coppola put his like heart and soul into this movie, and it almost wasn't made. He put his like real life money, everything. He brought his like wife down there, every little thing to make this movie happen. He tried his best, and it worked out because I think the movie is incredible and it's fascinating to watch. I think it just hits notes for me that are really exciting. I found the biggest thing is probably the plot. It's just so incredible, and the acting is great. You have Marlon Brando, Martin Sheen, who obviously was having issues during that time period, was also still doing a good job. I thought everyone was at least solid in their performance of what they did. I really like Dennis Hopper and the guy who plays Chef. I forget his name, but both of them were super entertaining. Uh, I find that just story, just in general, this story in particular, is just very exciting, and I really, really like the movie. I loved the Jim Morrison Doors stuff, and I believe Francis Ford Coppola and Jim Morrison were roommates, or at least knew each other in college, because both of them both went to UCLA. So yeah, I don't know. It's this movie's just incredible. I like can't think of things that are there are a few things I take it back. I was gonna say like I can't see like a few things that are wrong with it. I'm sure there's like a few niche little things here and there, but it's still to me so fascinating as a movie. The movie is also about, as I mentioned earlier, the psychosis in mind and the deterioration of that. And you really see that as they go up the river with each character. One character, the surfer, Lance drops acid and he starts acting stranger and stranger since then. Um, the one chef character gets attacked by a tiger. You see him having a freak out. There's a whole scene with this boat being attacked, and it was just local farmers hiding a puppy. And the characters that we're supposed to be following, who are the protagonists, technically end up shooting and killing these innocent people. It's really hard to watch. There's a lot of scenes like this in the movie that are hard to watch. I watched the original before, and I watched the redo version. Is like the director's cut, and it just had like an extra 45 minutes of scenes of certain stuff, and it was. I'm glad some of that was taken out because some of it was funny, and then other times the scenes were like really, really intense. One of my favorites that was not in the movie was of the original cut of the movie was a scene about like they were talking about politics of France and the French Indochina War, which more or less was like prior to the Vietnam, and it was a really damaging history on itself, and it kind of like discussed colonialism, socialism, communism, and democracy, and it kind of goes into this whole idea of it, and it's a really interesting scene discussing the whole concept of the U.S.'s global control over the world and its own like sphere of influence, and I thought that was a really neat scene. And I can see why they took it out though. It wasn't necessarily needed, and like I'm sure like it really helped at least for the U.S. to like get that cut out. So we're not making a Transformers movie out here. We're like half of the budget came from the military. But yeah, hard to the fact that this movie came out with all of its problems. Crash Course mentioned the physical health of Martin Sheen, the weather and how damaging that was, or even the military, which I didn't know this. I didn't know about how awful the weather was during filming, and Martin Sheen's problems, but in particular, like the Philippines military having to take their stuff back, I had no idea about, which I thought was fascinating. It really just goes to show that like almost everything that could go wrong in this movie, at least for production, did go wrong, which is hilarious. Awful. It's awful, but I'm really excited that this movie came out. A lot of people consider this a 10. I would probably give it like a 9.5. I think there's days where I really would consider it a 10. I'm not a big war movie person, but I do really appreciate the historical fiction that comes from these stories, and they're so interesting. Like other examples, especially Vietnam in particular, is like Full Metal Jacket was like such a special movie to me. So seeing this, it was incredible. And I didn't see this movie for a very long time in my life until recently. I think I saw it like a year ago. So it was just an exciting movie that I can't have a bad thing to say about, other than like there's moments where I'm like, but like I wasn't like bothered. This movie has such a intense feeling behind it, and I think that can be like hard for a lot of people when watching this movie because it does have a lot to say. It's long. It's visually really, really good. There's some scenes in there that are like super impressive, and like especially like the helicopter scenes where the dance scene and the stuntmen that are on the helicopter I thought was really cool. The harshness of the one area where the bridge collapses constantly, and those dudes, the military men, are like just tragically just there, with no commanding officer, just struggling to stay alive, fighting for no reason, really just exemplifies not only the hardships of Vietnam and like the waste of time it was, but also just the tragedy of all these people having to fight, and how it affects you mentally, and the chance of you actually dying in it. It's horrifying, and this movie does a really good job of that. This movie is a lot of different things, and I think that's what makes me like it so much. Yeah, it's a great movie. 9.5 for sure.